Hello and welcome to the MSPC Bros channel, and today we'll be talking about the 3080. This is the next graphics card released by Nvidia we'll be covering in this three-part series. We'll cover the same stuff as the last video, which includes price, general and in-depth specs, and more. What are we waiting for? Let's get into it. For starters, we'll go over some of the general specs of the 3080. Our first spec is that it has 10 GB of GDDR6X memory. This is really good, and considering it has a new type of upgraded VRAM, it makes it even better. It runs on a 320-bit system, so you can have more bandwidth than ever before. This can help a lot if you plan on putting a lot of workload onto it, since it can help lower the chances of it freezing and lagging a ton compared to older GPUs. It also comes with 8,704 CUDA cores. CUDA cores are cores on the processor that process the data that it is told to do by the computer. The more cores, the more processing power that it has. This, along with the 320-bit system, come together to make your gaming experience more smooth and realistic than ever imaginable. Next comes the speed of the 3080, which isn't a huge leap of improvement compared to the previous 20 series. A base clock speed of 1440 MHz and a boost clock speed of 1710 MHz is what the 3080 comes with. Now, there's nothing wrong with the speeds, but it was not as much of an impressive improvement compared to the previous specs. But regardless, not all PC parts are perfect. That's it for general specs. Now it's time for system specs.
Start off, the 3080 is G-Sync compatible. G-Sync is used to connect the monitor and the GPU closer together to reduce screen tearing, which can make the game more realistic and seem smoother. Another feature is that it is VR ready. Since we have a lot of new VR systems out there, including Oculus, you need a good PC that can handle all that power. Luckily, this GPU can handle that, and this is no surprise since the 20 series GPUs can do the same. Another thing that is required in order of all this technology to run properly is the right amount of power. It requires a PCU of at least 750 watts. This is to make sure the GPU has enough power that it is stable. Finally, the maximum temperature it can reach is 93 degrees Celsius, but it should almost never hit that hot of a temperature. The fans used to cool down the GPU and its hardware are made to cool as much of it as possible to make the card last longer and produce better quality images and games on your monitor or monitors. That's it for the system specs. Now it's time for the hardware specs.
This GPU has second generation ray tracing, as do all the other 30 series graphics cards. This is a newer version of ray tracing compared to what the 20 series used, with a much better realistic feel than before, and with many more games that are compatible with it. Next, third generation Tensor cores allow for the best computing power ever seen from a GeForce graphics card. This means better graphics and performance than before, since more in-game visuals can be loaded at a faster rate, bringing an even more realistic feel on top of the ray tracing if you have a game that can support it. Finally, it runs on Ampere Technologies, which is just a code name for the processing cores used in the 30 series GPUs and beyond. So it is another upgrade from the previous Turing architecture in the 20 series and 16 series GPUs. Well, that's it for hardware specs. Now it's time for connection and power specs.
With all this technology and performance comes the need of a lot of power. This is why the 3080 requires 320 watts to operate at its best potential. This does not mean you only need a PCU with only 400 watts, because the other components in your PC will require power as well. This is why they recommend a 750 watt PSU or more, as we said before. Next, it requires two 8-pin PCIe power cables to have the necessary power delivered to it. This is why a 750 watt PSU is recommended as the minimum, because it has the necessary connections and cables to deliver the power, which is how it can prevent you from using a lower watt PSU. Finally, it uses a PCIe 4.0 x 16 slot. It does not need one to work at its best because it will typically not go at its max bandwidth, so a PCIe 3.0 x 16 slot is able to run it. Next up, we have the connection port specs you will need to connect the GPU to your monitor.
What is the point of all of this power if it can't be used? Well, that's why we're talking about the connection and ports that are included that you can use to connect the GPU. First, it has one HDMI 2.1 port and three DisplayPort 1.4a ports. DisplayPort is the connection you would use typically since it has better frames and better resolution than HDMI, which is why there are 3 of them. The maximum monitors this GPU can support is 4 because there are only 4 connection ports to connect the monitor to. Lastly, the highest resolution you can achieve is 7680 by 4320 pixels or 8K. This is one of the main things that caused people to become excited about this new line of graphics cards. This creates newer and better views in-game than ever before, which is why it is one of the most wanted GPUs out on the market today. Finally, for the dimension specs.
First, the length of the card is 11.2 inches or 285 millimeters. This is a bit longer than the standard 2-fan GPU, which is about 9 to 10 inches. Next, the width is 4.4 inches or 112 millimeters. Compared to most graphics cards, ends up being the same width, so not much of a size difference. Finally, it has a height of 2 case slots, which is roughly how long a standard GPU is. All in all, this graphics card is amazing, which is why it sold out as quickly as it did. So now it's time for the pros and cons.
For the pros, the 3080 comes in at around $699. This is a fair price for the specs and new features that will change the way you game. 10 GB of GDDR6X VRAM is a plentiful amount to have nowadays and will give you more than enough for gaming and other tasks you might do throughout the day. It's also nice to see Nvidia make a card using PCIe 4.0 since it can supply higher bandwidth compared to the 20 series which use PCIe 3.0. Lastly, it allows you to game in 8K. This is the biggest game changer as it allows more realistic and clear views that have never been seen before. Overall, it has a lot of pros, but when it comes to cons, it has a few of them as well. Firstly, it has a boost clock speed of 1710 MHz. Which is not that bad, but when you compare it to its AMD equivalent of the 6800 XT, which has a boost clock of 2250 MHz, you realize it is pretty slow, which is one of the main reasons why it was a major upset to the gamers. It also uses more wattage than its rival, the 6800 XT as well. It uses 320 watts, which the 6800 XT uses 300 watts. It's not a big difference, but when you compare specs, the 6800 XT is more power efficient, which is also another slight bummer, but not that major. Well, that's it for the 3080, so if you want to see more videos like this in the future, be sure to hit like and subscribe so we know you enjoy watching, and see you in the next video.